Oh, gosh. Okay, Tricia, I'm trying to remember the first time I met you. I know for sure, one of them. I mean, you and Mom were on all these circuits together. So I was always seeing you. But for sure, I know for sure, once, was at Bob Brown's, one of Bob Brown's functions, yes. And we were all in the restaurant and eating together. And you so impressed me. It was just, how can you not impress? You just are. And it's just always been, so, and we've just, you're just like this family friend. Tricia, you will see, there's a similar background. I mean, I made a joke to my friend earlier. It's almost like I think she might be competing. She might have had a competition going with Mom for a while there. So it's like, okay, about in the research department and the writing books department and stuff. I mean, this woman, you don't find many people that are tenacious for information and things like this. It's like when she was talking to me and telling me all this information she had, I'm like, how do you know this? I don't, how? And she still hasn't told me. She's going to make me take her course to find out. So, anyway, oh my gosh. Oh, anyway, so it was really interesting. And the story about, we were trying to, I think that's an interesting story. We're trying to decide like what topics, because she had all these topics she could talk about. And here again, it's one of those fate things. We had finally come down to, it's like, okay, we have these two that I mean, she had a lot, and I mean, I love all of her subjects, all of her topics and everything. It was like, man, how do we choose? I mean, I love them all. I want them all. But okay, we can only get one. Gee, okay. So we decided on one, but we had it down to two that I really wanted the two. And then all of a sudden, Blair calls me. He was our other keynote speaker for Saturday night. And all of a sudden he calls me out of the blue, bright and early in the morning. He said, I had to wait until I knew it would be a time when you're up, because he's in New Zealand, right? He calls me, he's like, Julia, I've got this situation and I'm not going to be able to be there. I can't come. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. All right. So what are we going to do? And Brandy in our office, she's like, well, remember, Tricia had all that information. She had those two topics that you guys you're struggling to figure out which one you wanted. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll call her. I'm going to call her. I'm going to find out. And I was catching her exactly just before she was heading out to go to LA to do a talk. I mean, I caught her on the way out the door, and I'm like, I didn't even get it out of my mouth. I just said, Tricia, Blair's not going to be able to be here. He's having a situation. She goes, hey, you know how much material I have? I'm glad to do the talk. I'm glad I can do it. I'm like, see, that's how we work. That's how we work, and that's how wonderful she is, and she's wonderful. She's had this stuff. Anyway, she's relentless. She's had strangeness going on all her life. I've got to get off of here because she's got so much she's got to tell you. So anyway, you're going to see this. I know this isn't a proper introduction, but she's wonderful. You're going to love her. And Tricia McCannon, get up here.
Yeah, you're so sweet. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julia. I really love this family, and I treasured Dolores greatly. We were colleagues for many, many years on the circuit, and, it was a great loss for all of us to lose her. How many of you knew her? She was such a pioneer, and she was so brave. And, she looked like Betty Crockett, I mean, she was like someone's grandmother, and yet she was on the leading edge over and over again. And, I've just finished my 4th book. She wrote 19 books? I mean, talk about prolific, incredible. So I just want to say to you, Dolores, I know you are up there in heaven, but I also know you well enough to know that you've visited other people. I know people actually that claim that Dolores has come and talked to them. So she is still very involved and very active on the inner planes in helping to move consciousness forward in the world. So I just, with the deepest appreciation as a friend and a colleague, I want to really take a minute to just honor her tonight. Let's give her a hand of applause. Dolores, thank you for everything. Okay, we have a lot to talk about tonight, so I'd like to just start off by asking a couple of questions. How many of you have ever heard me speak? Raise your hand. Good. How many of you have heard me speak in person? YouTube, internet, webinars? Okay, good. Okay, right. Okay, good. So how many of you don't know who I am? Who the heck is she? Okay, good. Okay, that's a good place to start. So tonight we're going to be talking, of course, about incredible subjects. Some hidden things that are going on the planet that really tend to indicate that we have a vast history behind us, a history most people know very little about. And in fact, we're just in the process, even those of us who are on the leading edge, of discovering what these are. Antarctica is part of this equation, but it's only part of it. And so this presentation, like the one tomorrow night, is about 250 slides. It is a lot of slides. So we're gonna, I'm gonna give you a little thermonuclear brain meltdown, but I'm sure you'll be able to keep up because you're so smart out there. After all, you are Dolores's audience. And she was very famous for doing that herself. So we're going to be talking about the evidence for advanced civilizations on the planet prior to the one that we've all been living in. What do the ancients say about this? And we're going to be looking at anomalous evidence that tends to indicate that actually this world and human evolution is much older than what it is that we think. But I'm going to take about 5 or 6 minutes to really talk about myself. I'm a clairvoyant. I've been a clairvoyant since I was a little girl. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up across from a great forest, and I began to have experiences as a child with interdimensional beings. I'm the author of 3 separate books, and each one of these is its own story. The book I'll speak for a moment about Dialogues with the Angels. This was my first book, and I've only probably got 9 of them left downstairs. I didn't bring a lot of books for the conference because it's a lot to haul from Atlanta. This book really begins when I'm a child, and I begin to see these elemental devic spirits in the forest. How many of you have seen that or felt that or know about divas or elementals? They're like the guardian angels of the plant kingdom. And I think that most humans can't see them, and so they were surprised that I could see them. So they told the overlighting angel of that forest to come and talk to me. So when I was 8 years old, this male angel came and began to speak to me about the vast chain of being and how the light and the sound of God are stepped down through the dimensions to eventually come into the 3rd dimension, the concrete world. Well, that made perfect sense to me. Doesn't that make sense to you guys, that it's all vibration? I was like, okay, sure, this sounds good. So growing up, I grew up in one of those great American dysfunctional, households. How many of you relate to that? Yeah. My family was traditionally Christian. My dad was a Baptist, my mother was a Methodist, and we became Episcopalian. And I was actually confirmed at the age of 13. But my dad had been a military man. He was a lieutenant commander in the Navy, and he was like a John Wayne kind of man. He pitched in the minor leagues, he ran track, he flew planes, but he had a massive stroke when he was 37. And so that pretty much wiped it out for him, and he fell into alcoholism. So he became, unfortunately, although he was very brilliant and very moral, we saw the worst of him. He became a very abusive alcoholic, and my poor little strong mother just tried to hold it together. And so my two sisters and I, we grew up in this. So we all had different coping mechanisms. And mine was to take long walks at night under the stars and rant and rave to God about the unfairness of life. And why is there suffering? Can any of you relate to that? So I found that there was this divine presence that was walking by my side that would always ask me questions that would counsel compassion, basically, and help me to come back to a place of forgiveness. And so I did a lot of praying growing up that someone wiser than myself would show up to help me explain why one night I would be in the temples of golden wisdom with masters having experience. The next night I'd be in the bowels of the lower astral plane, sitting on piles of dead bodies. The next week, I would be visiting with positive extraterrestrials on board ships. It was like, okay, how does this gift work? How do you steer this? And with my clairvoyance, I would look at people as a child and I'd be flooded with information about them. Sometimes I'd try to see stuff and I couldn't see stuff. How many of you can relate to that? Well, so I was trying to get a grip on my gift. So when I was 19 years old, a group of masters appeared to me called the Viragi. Now, the word Viragi comes from the Sanskrit word virag, which means detachment. So these are masters that have detached from the world. They're not married. They're not looking for money, fame, sex, none of that, okay? They're interested in spiritual enlightenment, and they had literally traveled through the dimensions, and they had a roadmap to these dimensions. So when I was at school at Florida State University, where I graduated, these masters appeared to me when I was 19, and they said, we've watched you for many years, we've put you through many tests, and because you've always chosen forgiveness and compassion, we've decided to train you. And so they had something called soul travel, which is the ability each one of us have, if we learn to do it, to shift our consciousness while we're still living in the physical world and to access these higher dimensions. And I was like, that is my kind of path. I don't have to believe something. I don't have to take somebody's word for it. I can find out for myself. And so, in the Clark Kent world, I graduated from school. I became an art director and a commercial photographer. I moved back to Atlanta. I was the first female commercial photographer. I set up a 5,000 square foot studio. I had 5 over the course of about 25 years. I shot for Macy's, IBM, Coca-Cola. I had full-time assistants, part-time assistants, models. That was my life. But my inner world was all about developing these gifts and talents and abilities for my own spiritual enlightenment. And along the way, masters began to appear, angels began to appear. I was taken into halls of wisdom and taught in many great temples in the higher worlds. And so that is what this first book is really about, the dialogues with the angels. And the last third of the book is really the great beings that have been my teachers for the last 30 years. And they are very much the Divine Father and the Divine Mother of creation. And so this is a very powerful book. Now, this book was my second book. I never in a million years intended to write a book on Jesus. Let me just tell you. My older sister is a fundamentalist Christian married to a Presbyterian minister, and they are definitely convinced that all of us are going to hell, okay? In fact, everyone that doesn't belong to their church is probably going to hell. I mean, specifically their church. The other Christians don't even get into heaven, just their church. So as you can imagine, this was the last thing I ever intended to take on. So what happened for me was that I was writing a book about the great spiritual mysteries, because when I was 27 years old, I wound up being contacted by another group of great masters and taken into these initiation in the physical world to learn about the Egyptian mysteries, the Celtic mysteries, the Native American twisted hair tradition, and the divine feminine tradition, which I did not even know existed in the world. So I was writing a book about that when, I started, as I was writing the book about the mysteries, I thought, well, I'm just going to put in a chapter on Jesus. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll put one in about his lost years. Oh, I'll put one in about where his secret teachings. I'll put one in about why he came, when he came. Before I knew it, I had 200 pages on Jesus, okay, inside of now a 600-page book, okay. It was way too big for the publisher. So I thought, Mamma mia, they're having babies. What am I going to do? I don't know. I know what I'll do. I'm just going to pull out the 200 pages on Jesus. That is going to solve my problem. So I was laying on the floor of my office with my hand over my eyes like this, that week after Christmas, which, I love that week because everyone's tired, broke, tryptophaned out from the turkey that they've eaten. My birthday's the day after Christmas, so everything's quiet, dead quiet. But it's a perfect time for a writer to write. So I was laying on the floor, and I became aware of this brilliant light shining down through my arm. And I moved my arm, and Jesus was standing in the room about the distance from here to the piano here. And he was all in golden. And he was about 6 feet tall. His hair was wavy. It was about down to here. And without any preamble, he said, I want you to write a book about my lost years and secret teachings. There has been enough war and bloodshed in my name. And it was like, your heart is pierced by an arrow. When a being like that, the immensity of his energy field was so enormous and totally heart-based. And when I could even just catch my breath, I thought, well, can I finish this other book? Because I'm running out of money. We're so human, aren't we? We're just so mortal. And he smiled and he waved his hand. He said, don't worry about it. It'll just take a moment. I'll open every door. And of course, it took 3 years, and I had to remortgage my house twice to pay my bills. But once I committed to do it, I was in the cave. And I thought to myself, one of the things I've seen in the 6,000 readings that I have done for people all around the world is that there's something called your karma and your dharma. Your karma is like the challenges you come in with, whether it's your family situation, money challenges, health challenges, crazy mother, crazy father, crazy sister, brother, whatever the circumstances are that seem to be our difficulties in life. But in truth, we choose those difficulties, that karmic situation, to propel us, to push our buttons, to plant the seeds so that we step into our mission. We're driven to want to answer those questions. The young girl whose father spends 5 years dying of cancer decides to become a doctor, a healer, a naturopath. The young man who loses his father in war becomes a big brother and changes the lives of hundreds of young boys. So in every life, the sorrow that we experience brings us, if we face it instead of run from it, to a higher place. And so I realized that my fundamentalist sister and her preacher husband that had been driving us all crazy was the catalyst for me to have collected all these esoteric books through all the years, not only on the great spiritual mysteries, but also on Jesus and books that most people don't know. So once I committed to do this, because I'm a clairvoyant, I'm a visual, and I teach and learn through visual information, I created a whole series of powerful presentations on the Egyptian mysteries, then on the Jewish mysteries, the esoteric ones, and then on the inner teachings, the real inner teachings of Christianity. And then I began to write in June, 6 months later. And when that happened, I had masters showing up at my house day and night. I had books materializing on my bookcase. I had people knocking on my door with volumes that had been brought by Joseph of Arimathea in 37 AD to England that had been kept by the priest of Glastonbury until the last few years where finally they were brought up and published. It was like miracle after miracle. I had a little girl, 5 years old, stay at my house. And she slept in the guest room where I had been sleeping because it was a Jack and Jill bedroom with a bathroom in between, and they were waking me up at all hours of the day and night, and so I could just walk 30 feet to the computer and begin to download. So I let her sleep in this room. The next morning, I gave her this teddy bear as we were going off to breakfast. And I said, now you can name this little bear anything you want. And she said, Issa. And I said, oh, you mean Eliza. She said, Issa. And I said, you mean Elizabeth? She said, Issa. Issa is the name Jesus used everywhere he went. So he had come in the night to see me, and this little girl was so psychic that she had picked up on it. So this book is encoded with 144 energetic codes from the masters. It's a gigantic tour de force of the mysteries and where Jesus went and what happened in his life and where he studied. Now, when that book finally came out, It had only been out about 2 months, and of course I was really profoundly steeped in an understanding of the great solar lords, the great incarnations of these divine masculine, beautiful spiritual masculine beings who've come to Earth to help the planet. And I was actually meditating in the bathtub, believe it or not. Yes, there was a fire going. I have a fireplace, and my bathtub is the coolest thing about my whole house. And I suddenly had this ball of light, opalescent and purple and grayish light come down and descend over me, and it was surrounded by like 10,000 petals, golden petals, and the petals were all the incarnations of the great solar lords. And I mean, with all my knowledge, I could maybe only name 30, okay? There were so many that had come, not only on this planet, but on other planets, to bring enlightenment. But this pearl of great price was this energy called Sophia, and she said, I am the thing that all of them have sought. I am the one that all of them have served, the wisdom of the Divine Mother, and I will make you a vessel of my energy. And I was like, well, okay, but I'm looking around at the solar lords. I'm like, okay, well, that's really very nice and so forth, but look at all those solar lords. You know, the next night she came and the same thing happened again. And I was like, okay, I don't know what really this means, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it, you know. So then I went on to start my next book, which was the 167 pages of his secret teachings that I had pulled out, and my question was, could I combine it with the great spiritual mysteries, with the divine feminine? And in fact, I did, but the name of this book changed 5 times. Finally, in the very end, when it was going to press, my publisher said, well, just tell me what the book is about. I said, well, it's really just about the return of the divine feminine and how we've fallen out of balance in the world, and how this patriarchal current has become so suppressive, and it's suppressive to men as well as women, and it's been going on, and we've inherited it for so long we don't even know what's happened to us. It's about healing the earth through bringing this divine feminine current up into balance with the positive masculine. It's about the return of the divine Sophia to heal the earth through the lost wisdom teachings of Jesus and Isis and Mary Magdalene, which enlightened men and women have known, these great avatars. She said, well, let's call it that. The return of the divine Sophia. So that is how this book was born. And of course, Sophia, who had come 3 years earlier, knew all about it. I was the last to know, and often that's how it really is, isn't it? This is my new book. This book will come out in October, the end of September actually, with Inner Traditions. This is about the landscapes of heaven. Over the course of 30 years, I've done over 6,000 readings. And in the beginning, I was only going back 3, 4, 5,000 years in people's soul histories. And then I made a leap to where I was going back 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 years. And in some cases, I would see that my clients were coming in on spaceships, especially during the time of Atlantis, which Atlantis was a star capital. Atlantis achieved the highest level that we have achieved on this planet, although in the end, it did fall into ruin and it did lose its way. But for a period of 10,000 years or more, it was an incredibly high consciousness place where they were using telepathy and telekinetic ability and really working on spiritual consciousness and ascension while being embodied in the physical body. And so what I discovered after a while, I thought to myself, well, where did they come from? And I started pulling the thread in their Akashic records, and I found myself back in the Pleiades, or the Sirius system, or the Orion system, or the Andromedean system, or the Arcturian system. And of course, as long as I was there, I wanted to look around. Wouldn't you? Yeah, of course. We want to know what's going on. So then after a while, I thought, well, I wonder where they were before that. So I started pulling the thread, and it took me many years to be able to work at this level of the inner planes. But eventually, I came to what I would call the Genesis Matrix. And the Genesis Matrix is where we all come from. And to my complete and utter astonishment, because this was totally different from what I had been taught, I discovered that we all come out of the angelic kingdoms. So the question became, well, wait a minute. If we started off in the angelic kingdom where we were so connected, what the hell happened? I mean, forgive the French here, but I mean, what happened to us? How do we become so disconnected that we come down here and commit suicide and mass murder and rob and steal and do all the horrible things that humans seem to be able to do so very well? So then my search became to discover where that disconnection took place, or our perception of the disconnection took place. And so then it became how to heal it. How to heal it within each one of us so that we could become realigned with ourselves. So this book comes out in the fall. They've given me a color folio, and you know I'm all about the pictures. I just can't help myself. So I'm so thrilled. I'm going to get 16 color inserts, and all my books have about 100 black and white illustrations, and I've actually done most of them because the masters encoded their wisdom in something called hermetics. Hermetics is the secret symbol language of the soul, and at the core of your being, all of you already know hermetics because you've all been in the inner planes. Where do you think you go between your lifetimes? Of course you've been up there. But once you begin to understand hermetics, it opens it's like a key opening a lock to give you access into these higher dimensional realms. And so, of course, they taught with it. And they were able to preserve their secrets that way. So if it was Inquisition time and you saw an owl and you didn't know any better, it's just a bird. If you are an initiate, you understand that this is a code for clairvoyance, those who can see in the darkness, those who can see what others cannot see. So, for example, there's a very powerful off-world order called the Order of the White Owl, which are all seers. So I have a mystery school I've been teaching for about 12 years. For many years, people would call me from all around the world and say, do you have it online? And I had to say, sorry, no, I don't. I finally, about 3 years ago, got it online. Each one of these is between 100 and 180 pages with all sorts of processes and exercises and wisdom and knowledge, and of course, lots and lots and lots of images because I'm teaching through that. And if you're interested in this, I've got brochures down at my booth that you can come and get for free. And they're only like $99 a class, or you can get the first 3 for like $225, which saves you like $75. And you can study if it's a husband and wife, or 2 companions that are under the same roof. That's all fine to study that way. And in support of this, I have all sorts of DVDs about the mysteries, and of course also about the extraterrestrial situation, and about consciousness, about the tree of life. You can see Thoth, who is one of the beings who really began the great spiritual mystery schools. Angels and the Anunnaki is, of course, about the Anunnaki settlement. There's one on angels and extraterrestrials. This is giants that are like 20 to 30 feet tall. Incredible information. So, again, all these are down at my booth, and I have a brochure, so you can buy whatever you want to. I've only brought a few, maybe 4 to 6 of about 10 titles. So I don't have all the titles here, but they're great. So now we're going to begin our conversation. How many of you are interested in this subject? I think me too, very interested. And so we're going to actually take a look at what we have been taught. Most of us know that in our traditional school system, we are taught one of 2 things is true. The generally accepted thing in the scientific community is Darwinianism, right? Which that wasn't true until probably 150 years ago. Darwin wasn't readily accepted at the time. But his teachings were basically that everything evolves through time, and that we evolved from apes, basically. And so, of course, we've been looking for the missing link for, a long time. And, of course, we haven't really actually found that missing link. Anthropology tells us that Homo sapiens have existed about 200,000 years. We've managed to push that back because we've gone down and found in South Africa, we've carbon dated Homo sapiens bones at between 150 and 200,000 years. And in fact, this is interesting because these bones have been found around gold mines, supporting the whole Anunnaki theory that they were using humankind at one time for kind of slave labor. However, Homo sapiens sapien, which is us, meaning knowing, have only supposedly been around 40,000 years. This is what, right now, we currently believe in anthropology. So we know that there are these 2 theories. There's the evolution theory from Darwin, but then, of course, there's been the old-time religion belief that everything in the Bible was literally true, and that, if you add up all the generations, it only goes back like 6,000 years or something. And so supposedly, God came down and said, presto, change-o, dirt become human, woman, and then Eve is taken out of Adam's rib, and that's why she's supposed to be subservient, by the way, is because she's an appendage to God, to man. And of course, if you really want to get into that conversation, there are the original teachings were the Elohim, which is God's plural, and man and woman were created together. But then the patriarchy wound up changing it to another story, what was God's singular, the El, not the Elohim, and it became man created first, women created second, which, by the way, is completely a misnomer because every single mammal on this planet, including humans, are created biologically female first. Yes, the existence of the male is because of a release of an additional androgen. So the male is a subset biologically of all females, not just because females give birth, but this is biologically true in the outflow of how the chromosomes develop. So we've actually been told a complete reversal of what biology teaches us. So in biblical creationism, supposedly God intervened to create man 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. Now, of course, if we say it wasn't God, we say it was the gods or the Elohim, although it certainly wasn't 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, we can certainly see how both of these are possibly true. Maybe there really is evolution, yes, and maybe there has been intervention from, let us say, star beings. How many of you would vote that that's the case? I think that that's probably the case. We've probably got both going on. However, in evolution, we're supposed to have come from primates. And that's an interesting conversation because we haven't been able to figure out exactly what the link is. In that version of reality, what they're discovering is that basically every 500,000 years we move from Neopithecus to Java man to Peking man to eventually Neanderthal and then to Cro-Magnon man and then to Homo sapien, etc. However, there's some challenges with this because it doesn't quite fit the existence of Homo sapiens. So there are a lot of unanswered questions that we still don't know in these great mysteries of human evolution. And in fact, we know that at a female level, we've traced what we believe human ancestry back to someone called Lucy. And Lucy really was the first female. She was found in Africa. She was discovered in 1974. She was composed of hundreds of different bone fragments comprising about 40% of what's called Australopithecus, which would be our great ancestor. Now she's dated to about 3.2 million years old, and she's thought to be the common ancestors of all humans. The skeleton presents a small skull akin to a non-hominid apes, plus evidence of a walking gait that was bipedal and upright, akin to that of humans. So this is sort of current anthropology. Now, even more current is this. There's a genetic study that feels like they found a male that we are all connected to going back around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. If it's 200,000 years ago and Zecharia Sitchin's translations of the Sumerian cuneiform text is accurate, then that would kind of put it right in that pocket. So they're talking between 200 and 300,000 years that there was some kind of a male gene that was given, which would have probably been Inky's gene, to the human race to move us forward. However, anthropology believes that humans emerged from only one branch of the primate kingdom. So you can sort of see here, we've got the orangutans, we've got the gorillas, we've got the chimpanzees. I'm not really sure who this guy is, but basically the question is, why haven't these guys evolved, and how come only one branch has evolved? Well, that would tend to imply that there was some kind of intervention. And it suggests really outside manipulation. So if you actually look back at this, we've got I can't even see this one, Ardipithecus, another version of Australopithecus, Sedia, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapien. If you could see these, basically they change about every 500,000 years. However, what happens when Homo sapien comes in, he comes in way too early. In other words, it should be another 500,000 years, really, or more, or a little less, before we showed up. Again, implying that there's been some kind of manipulation. Now, of course, how many of you are familiar with Zecharia Sitchin's work? Zacharias Sitchin was a Jewish scholar who was one of about 10,000 people in the world that could read Sumerian cuneiform texts. In the 1820s, 1830s, there was a city called Nineveh that was discovered, I think, in Iraq or Iran, one of those places. And of course, this is talked about in the Bible. And we uncovered hundreds of thousands stone cuneiform texts. We found 22,000 of these in the temple precinct. Now, a lot of the rest of them were things like, not the temple precinct, were things like who got married, who owned what land, all the kind of normal day-to-day activities. But in the temple precinct, they talked openly about the fact that about 435,000 years ago, these very tall, long-lived, extraterrestrial human beings came down to Earth. They had a problem with their own ozone layer on their planet. Like we've had problems with ours. Their scientists figured out that if they could suspend gold foil, it would block the cosmic rays. Well, interestingly enough, we've discovered if we put gold foil sheeting on the windows of our astronauts' capsules, it protects them from the cosmic rays. So very similar technology. So the problem was they didn't have enough gold. So they basically came here to try to mine gold. And they were mining for several 100,000 years. And they found huge deposits down in South Africa. And this is the work of Michael Tellinger. Michael Tellinger is a white South African guy who's discovered, tens of hundreds of these mines, gold mining shafts down there. And so it seems like that there's a lot to this story that is true. Well, after a while, their own people got tired of working in the mines. They rebelled. This is according to the translations of Zacharias Sitchin of these Sumerian cuneiform text. And so the gods were, what can we do? Either we let our planet perish and we don't get any more gold, or we get some help. How can we get help? So they looked around, found a more primitive form of man. They worked for a really long time to kind of jumpstart our DNA. Eventually they did. Apparently we weren't the brightest things in the world, but they got us to work for them. And then over time, they kind of fell in love with us. They really thought we were great. And so then they upped our DNA to another level, the Homo sapiens sapien. And this is sort of the Adam and Eve story, where Adam and Eve were taught all this incredible knowledge by the gods and honored. And so it's a very big conversation, but this is what the Anunnaki are. And the Anunnaki were just very much like us. I mean, you had ones that were very enlightened beings who really loved humanity and were really working for the evolution and the consciousness of humankind. And you had ones that were, hey, let's just get them down here, do the science, get the goal, and go home. They had others that were like, they're kind of slow, short, and stupid. Let's just put them to work. Okay, so you had every range, from those who adored us to those who were like, just, my God, do I have to put up with these humans that are breeding like rabbits and making a whole bunch of noise, like rowdy children, taking over the whole planet. And so there are even stories in the Sumerian cuneiform texts about how the head honcho god got so annoyed by humans that he sent the flood to actually wipe us out. And then one of the other gods intervened and basically saved humanity and the DNA of all these different species, kind of the Noah's Ark story. So it's a really kind of big conversation. So that's only one of the species that's interacted with us. So the question becomes, is our civilization the only advanced civilization that's ever been on our planet? Is this really what happened? So Scientific American, for example, several years ago, you might remember this, discovered these little hobbit people. Do you guys remember this? This was on an island. These aren't dwarfs. These aren't midgets. These are full human-looking beings. They just happen to be the size of hobbits, and they kind of had big feet. So, maybe J.R.R. Tolkien was, tuned in and channeling that incredible, Lord of the Rings series. And at that time, it appears that there were also other kinds of beings on the planet. For example, these are the bones, and I have whole slideshows that show, 12, 15, 20, and 30-foot tall beings that they are now finding the bones of. This one's about 20, 21 feet. This one's found in Greece. And this is mind-blowing stuff. It should be on the nightly news. Take a look at this one. This is the femur bone from one of them. Unbelievable. I mean, this guy would have to be about 14 to 16 feet tall. So, if this dude's about 6 feet tall, this would be about 12 feet tall. He could even be 18 feet tall. So, next to human skeleton, this would probably be about a 12-footer. So, those poor priestesses that had to have sex with the gods, imagine, if size does matter, that could be a problem. Really, boys and girls. I mean, look at this one. So you can see the comparison of the size. This should be on the nightly news, but it's all really covered up. So the human race is still evolving, and that's actually, Scientific American, human evolution is not over. And I'm going to kind of show you how, tomorrow night, how the human race is evolving when we talk about the shift of the ages and where we're going in the future. So let's take a look at some strange artifacts and some odd anomalies. And this actually is it's Persian. This was a UFO. Here's the wing. Maybe they were solar panels for all we know. This is the god Ahura Mazda. He's wearing one of the caps of the Anunnaki gods, maybe because they had extended heads. We really don't know, but it's quite possible that they did. And, he's holding a bow. This was, Ahura Mazda was considered, he's Persian. He was considered a very positive god that represented, right and integrity. So let's take a look at some of the strange anomalies that have been found all over the world. This one here, this is a coin-like object that was found in a well in Long Ridge, Illinois, going down 114 feet below the surface. And according to the information supplied by the Illinois State Geological Survey, the deposits containing this coin are between 200 and 400,000 years old. So let's just ask, if humans were only created 200,000 years ago, did they immediately start making coins as soon as they got born? So if it is 400,000 years, it certainly messes with the timetable. Now, we could say maybe the gods had money, okay? But look at this. There appears to be a big old dude here. He looks like, I hate to say it, he's got a club or something. And here's a little guy. So, is he spanking his child, or is this a human, and this is more of a large extraterrestrial? The truth is, we really don't know. It poses a great mystery. This is a metallic tube found in Saint-Jean-le-Vey, France, in 65 million year old chalk bed. Well, you and I might not take even look at that, but the fact that it's in 65 million year old chalk bed, what is a metallic tube that was probably machine made doing in something that old? Now, these look like Buster Brown footprints. This is without the outline around it. This is the heel. This is with the outline. This was found in Cambrian shell near Antelope Springs, Utah. If genuine, the shoe print would be over 505 million years old. So that's definitely outside of our comfort zone. This one is amazing. There's a whole series of these spheres that have machine-made grooves around the center, like ball bearings here. You can see it really clearly here. This was found in South Africa, and the sphere was found in Precambrian mineral deposits said to be 2.8 billion years old. So did the ETs come and throw their trash out? Maybe that's what happened, We can only guess. Here they are again. You can see them. The spheres measure 1 inch or so in diameter and are etched with 3 parallel grooves around the equator. 2 types of spheres have been found, one composed of a solid bluish metal with flecks of white, the other hollowed out and filled with a spongy white substance. The rock in which they're found is 2.8 billion years, so who made them? And for what purpose? We have no idea. Now, this is a rock that grew around a screw, and the rock itself has been dated at 100,000 years. That's so where did the screw come from 100,000 years ago? Who made the screw? Was it a civilization already down here? Was it someone that came and visited and they threw some hardware out? We don't know. Look at this. This looks just like a 3-prong plug that we would use with the ground. This rock formed around this 3-prong plug. It was found in 1998 by a hiker named John Williams. It has the 3-prong electrical plug sticking out of it. Geologists say it's at least 100,000 years old, and that the rock formed around the plug. Here's a gold spiral metal. It was found in Denmark around 3,000 years ago. And what do we use these kinds of things for? Conducting of electricity, right? This is the kind of thing that we would even see today made in copper. This is a 3 million year old machine part found. It was discovered in Russia. It's an aluminum. It's called a tooth wheel, and it was embedded in a piece of coal. What kind of machine was it a part of? We don't know. Who made it? Where did it come from? We don't know. Humans didn't learn to make aluminum this pure until 1825. And Okay, so, it's obviously 300 million years old. So this one is 400 million years old. These are machine parts, again, found in Russia in this remote area of a peninsula, discovered by campers. Archaeologists at the University of St. Petersburg have confirmed its authenticity, according to archaeologist Yuri Golubev, the fine shock scientist, because it is clearly a machine with all sorts of grooves that's 400 million years old. And this is the area that it was found in Russia. I think this is kind of important to look at the geography. This is a Baghdad battery. Most of you have probably heard of the Baghdad battery. There have been several that have been found around the world. This is probably the most intact. It was found in 1938 by German archaeologists while excavating a 2,000-year-old village near Baghdad. Others like it have been found in the same area, but none as complete. And these are some of the details about it. It was found in the ruins of a Parthian village believed to date back to about 248 BC. The battery consists of a 5.5-inch high clay vessel, inside of which was a copper cylinder held in place by asphalt. Inside of that is an oxidized iron rod, making an electrical battery. Now, most of us are not scientific enough to really know how to make this, but basically all you have to do is fill the device up with acid or alkaline liquid, and it can produce an electrical charge. So, of course, scientists think, well, maybe they used it for electroplating gold. But how did they get the technology? Because we didn't have this technology for another 1,800 years. Now, these are very interesting. Have you guys heard of the Dropa stones? They're very interesting. They're definitely extraterrestrial. So let's talk about this story. In 1938, an archaeological expedition led by Dr. Chi Pu Te into the Birankara Ula Mountains, that's a mouthful, of China, made an astonishing discovery in some caves that had apparently been occupied by some ancient culture. Buried in the dust of ages on the cave floor were hundreds of discs measuring about 9 inches in diameter. Each disc had a circle cut into the center and was etched with a spiral groove, making it look for all the world like some kind of ancient photograph record from 10,000 to 12,000 years old. The discs contained high levels of cobalt and other metallic elements. When placed on a turntable and subjected to high-frequency sound waves, they began to oscillate as if they had been electrically charged or once formed part of an electrical circuit. The spiral grooves are actually composed of tiny hieroglyphs, unbelievable, that tell the incredible story of spaceships from some distant world that crash-landed in the mountains. The ships were piloted by people called the Dropa. The Dropa came from another world and had crashed into these mountains. They stood 3 to 4 feet high, had yellow skin and blue eyes. They were hunted by the local people until they finally managed to use sign language to communicate their peaceful intentions. Remains of bodies like this were found in caves that had been squared off with glazed walls as if created through using extreme heat, like lasers. There were also drawings in the cave showing the sun, moon, and a set of stars all joined together with dots. Quite interesting, huh? The Dropa stones. Now, this is interesting. In America, we have caves in a number of different states with Egyptian artifacts in them. This is quite astonishing. I'm, trained in the Egyptian teachings, and this is an ibis bird, and it's or a heron, one of the two, and it would be a glyph representing really Thoth. And this is the doors of the mysteries, okay? If it's an ibis, it's Thoth, the teacher of the mysteries. Here's the Ankh, the symbol for eternal life. If it's a heron, it's a Benu bird. The Benu bird is the phoenix bird that represents the Christ. Okay, that's the shorthand Hermetics. This is what we all aspire to become, is the phoenix bird that dies to their old self and is reborn as the enlightened being. So this is all about the great spiritual mysteries. These artifacts have been found in Arkansas, cool state, Ohio, another cool state, Illinois, Arizona, and Idaho. And you can see some of them here. They're really interesting. And I'm going to show you some other artifacts, Egyptian artifacts from the Grand Canyon in a little while. Now, these stone spheres, how many of you have heard about these spheres? These are actually artificial. We have no idea where they've come from, okay? They're all over Costa Rica. They're called Las Bolas by the locals. And they're huge. They were first discovered by Westerners in 1930s by the United Fruit Company while they were clearing jungles for banana plantations. And there's some 390 spheres scattered all over this river delta area as far away as Panama, but particularly around Palmar Sur and Canos Island. The spheres range in size from 3 to 8 feet in diameter, weigh as much as 16 tons. They're 95 to 100% geometrically perfect, which human hands cannot make, only a machine or nature. Remember in the first Indiana Jones movie when that giant stone ball was rolling down on him? That's like what this is. And of course, George Lucas is, an initiate. He knows a great deal. Some of these spheres weigh up to 16 tons and are 8 feet wide. That's huge, isn't it? And this is the president of Costa Rica. I just love it. Our presidents don't want to be posing with these kinds of things, but the Costa Rica president, bless his little heart, is totally willing to have a photo op with it. The largest ball is 8 feet wide and weighs 31 tons. That's 62,000 pounds. And similar balls have been found in New Zealand and Bosnia, composed of granite. And somebody today was telling me that there are some close to here. Who was that? Is that person here in this room? Well, hopefully they will come out and tell me tomorrow if you guys can pass the word. They said they were close by, that there are balls that have been found close here in Arkansas. Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
It's in Prim.
Pardon me?
Prim, down by Harrison.
Pyram?
P-R-I-M. Prim.
Okay, very cool. We're all going to be coming up, Travis, and talking to you. We want to know about them. We can take an expedition. Now, a lot of them have metallic coating. Look at this one. They're just out in the middle of the swamp, the swampy bayou. And these are ones from Bosnia. So the others, the metallic coating must have come off. So who made them and what were they used for? That's a very good question. Chemistry tests performed on the stone balls concluded that the stone material had been melted with additional chemicals added and then probably poured into a mold that formed it into perfect spheres. They'd have to be giants to even be dealing with this. Granite doesn't melt until it reaches 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. That is blast furnace temperature. Our current Western civilization did not develop that kind of industrial technology until the late 1800s. Iron cauldrons heated by wood fires would certainly never do that, yet that is how traditional historians would have us believe that they were made. So this is, again, an anomalous thing that we don't know what it is. We don't know where it came from. We don't know how it was made, but clearly it's not natural. It was brought here, or it was made here from an earlier civilization. Now, most of you may have seen this one. This is very interesting. The archaeologists like to say these are bees, gold bees. And there are quite a lot of them. They're found down in Bogota, Colombia, but they are clearly aerodynamic airplanes. These Incan artifacts look very much like fighter planes. They have wings, stabilizing tail, landing gears, and the engineers who've made model planes from their proportions and fitted them with propellers and engines found that they flew perfectly, indeed. Now, how many of you have seen this? This one's really interesting. This is in Denderah, the temple of Denderah, which was Hathor's temple. It was the sound temple. And the way that Egypt was, they had these registers. So the past would be in the bottom. The present would be in the middle, and the future would sometimes be at the top. Or we could say the animals and the vegetation were in the first two registers, the humans were in the next register, and the gods were all at the top. That's kind of how you could figure out what was being spoken of. So this is basically helicopters, look at this, submarines, some kind of plane. It looks like a Luke Skywalker speeder jet here. Okay, and we know it's the gods because the symbol for the bees, these were the beekeepers. In the ancient world, there were two preservatives, salt and honey. And so, if you wanted to preserve anything, you had to put it in one of those. So these were the preservers of the elixir of the knowledge, the gods, the beekeepers, the great spiritual mysteries. The pharaoh was called the beekeeper. In the Mithrin mysteries, they were also the head honchos of the Magi were called the beekeepers. In the lineage of Jesus, if you ever study about the Merovingian kings that were supposedly the genetic lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, when they uncovered their tombs, they found over 300 golden bees, telling us, again, in the language of Hermetics and the mysteries, that these were the gods or the keepers of the great wisdom mysteries. Here are spacemen found in Mayan lands. That looks kind of like an astronaut, don't you think? And look at this one. These are, again, Mayan and Incan, and they look pretty much like astronauts. Little faces coming out just like modern-day astronauts. This one is interesting. It looks like a little capsule like our NASA space program has. Here's the nose cone of it. Here's the little jets in the back, and here's the little dude wearing what looks like a flex suit here. And you can see here's the little flex suit, here's the nose cone, and here are the jet engines. Pretty interesting, huh? Now, this guy was found in a cave. He was fossilized. He was 14 inches tall, sitting in a yoga position in the southwest United States. So he had a tiny body and large eyes. Probably he crash landed on this planet in the 1800s. He looked around at the cowboys and the Indians, and he thought, they're going to have me for lunch. And he decided to just go into a cave and meditate and leave his body. And his body was found there fossilized because of the dryness of the southwestern air. Pretty interesting, huh? 14 inches tall. Now, these artifacts I'm going to show you next have just recently come to light. They were found in Mexico, and they were held back by the Mexican government for some 50 years, or 80 years, sorry. The government held them. But you can see here what looks like a UFO with a tractor beam coming down. Doesn't that kind of look like that to you? And look at this. Here's the planet Earth, okay? Here's a little UFO. Here's the capsule with a little dude inside, okay? It's like a little cartoon bubble, okay? Here's the ship that came in. It looks like, I don't know if it hit something. Here's another one here, but something appears to have happened. Where this was coming in, it looks like it impacted here. So in 2012, the Mexican government released a number of these Mayan artifacts that they had been protecting for 80 years as state secrets. And here's the pyramid that it was found in is called Calakmul Pyramid. And they found that there was another secret pyramid hidden inside the original pyramid. And this is where these artifacts were found. And you can see the very large eyes. And the pyramid had rooms in it that had never been discovered before. It was a Mayan settlement. And again, these are more of these artifacts. So there appear that there could have been at least 2 or 3 different kinds of beings. We see the kind of almond-shaped guys here, almond eyes, and then we have the round-eyed beings here. And then we look like we have conehead dudes here, okay? Now we know where the coneheads came from, on the Saturday Night Live skits. This is another one where we see a kind of a close-up of this little astronaut guy. He's all curled up in almost like a fetal position as he's coming in. And then here we have what appears to be a UFO with a tractor beam. And this guy is totally different looking at him. Look at his head. It's kind of like, I don't know, like a little Set creature. Do you guys know the emblem for Set? Set is was a kind of a dark lord in Egypt, not a popular being, but we don't know what that creature is anymore. That creature's not on our planet anymore. It probably died in the flood. And here we have another set of figures. These are UFOs. Now, no one knows if these are real, but the question would be, who in the right mind would make 300 of these if they weren't? In 1944, a German shopkeeper called Valdemar Julius Rudd claimed to have stumbled upon some mysterious figurines while on horseback near Acambaro in, I can't say this part of Mexico. He said that he found over 30,000 of them. With the help of a farmer, he collected them and brought them back. These are strange figures that resemble flying saucers, aliens, and human beings. So, the guy wasn't a potter. He didn't have the means to be able to make them, and they appear to be somewhat old. The sculpture shows a man riding a triceratops. Okay, so this is obviously in an earlier age, so it's showing dinosaurs and humans living together. Well, most mainstream paleontologists and geologists place dinosaurs on Earth's timeline around 220 million to 65 million years ago during the Mesozoic era. Homo sapiens did not appear in the traditional anthropological record until 200,000 years ago during the middle Pleistocene age, the Middle Paleolithic age, or the Middle Stone Age in Africa. There is, however, evidence that dinosaurs and humans may have coexisted for a time. If they are real, these figures are an example of this phenomena. And let me show you some things that might indicate that humans did exist further back. This is Dinosaur National Park in Texas. And these are human footprints in the time of the dinosaurs. And you can see this guy's pointing to some of these footprints. So, dinosaurs, were supposed to have gone extinct 65 million years ago before mankind even existed. So something's wrong with this story. And here we have another picture of these footprints. So obviously at one point this was mud. The humans were running quickly, probably away from the dinosaurs. Okay, and then eventually this wound up, solidifying into stone or into rock. So were there planets at that, humans on the planet at that time? It appears somebody was down here. So look at this one. This is a giant footprint in rock in India at a temple shrine. Clearly, this is not our size footprint. This is a very large footprint. And of course, you can see the people going, well, it's a footprint of one of the gods. Well, if it was singular, we could maybe argue somehow, this is in stone. This isn't in sand. How would somebody have made this? But it's not the only one. Look at this one. These are giant tracks embedded in stone in the Denderah temple in Syria. And look at the difference in the size of the feet from humans and whoever these large beings were. Here we are again. This is a human size. This is the size of the footprint. And this is all in stone that was at one time clearly some kind of, softer element. And this one is my favorite. Goliath's footprints. This is 4 feet long. It was found in South Africa, close to the Swaziland border. It's estimated to be 200 million to 3 billion years old. So that's quite a very tall being, wouldn't you say? So some of those legends of giants sound like they could be true. And this one is amazing. This is probably the largest of all of them. It's worshipped in Thailand. It's, they call it Hanuman's footprint. I'm sure it wasn't Hanuman. Hanuman's a different story altogether, but that's what they call it. But you can see, people are honoring it because they realize it obviously came from a time when these large beings were here. Look at this. This is a petrified UFO that went down in the Baltic Sea. And just to see a little clearer picture of it, it's all stone now. But just to look at the shape again, look at that shape. That's clearly, again, it looks like something we'd see on Star Wars. Incredible, huh? So, okay, now this is just a little preview of where we're going with Antarctica. They found 3 motherships down in Antarctica. This is recent, okay, in the last few years. And this is one of the motherships that they found in the ice down there. We'll return to Antarctica in a little bit. But before that, I want to show you some evidence of lost cities and ancient civilizations. In the last 200 years, we found over 500 lost cities. Now, some of these civilizations we know about and others we don't know about. Now, some of the ones you're going to recognize are Easter Island. There have been many great National Geographic specials on Easter Island, but the truth is we still don't know where these statues came from, who made them, and how they got moved. They weigh about 9 tons or 18,000 pounds each, and they stand around 13 feet tall, and some are even taller than that. There are about 1,000 of them. They're called the Morai, and no one knows their origin. Some are even 30 feet tall and weigh as much as 80 tons. So no one knows who made them, what they represented, or how they got there. However, the locals talk about the fact that the behemoths, they had to travel about 11 miles from the quarry where they were carved, and even we could not move them today with cranes. We have no way of moving them. But what the ancients say is that the Maori walked. In other words, they were levitated. There was some device that the ETs used that, was anti-gravity that levitated these stones across the landscape. So they say that they walked. Now in China, this is a city that we know really did existed. It's been sunken about 2,000 years. Look at the incredible artistry in this beautiful, beautiful scroll work. So there are cities that we've heard about in legend that we've just recently begun to uncover underneath the water. For example, one of the most famous is Heraklion. This is off of the coast, the northern coast of Egypt, where the Nile, spreads out and empties into the Mediterranean. This was a very popular, well-known, flourishing city. It was supposedly went down, it was talked about in Greek and Roman stories, supposedly it went down around 1,200 years ago through a gigantic tsunami that literally took this city and another city on the coast with it in like one fell swoop, which, we'd like to think that that can't happen. But as you're going to see, it is possible for it to happen. Heracleion and Canopus were the main seaports of the pharaohs before Alexander the Great founded the city of Alexandria in 331 BC. And you sort of see it was very flourishing at that time and so forth, lots and lots of commerce and levies and so forth. Existing for more than 1,200 years, Heracleion and its twin city only existed in legend. A bustling cosmopolitan port where the Nile met the Mediterranean, its splendors recounted by many great historians like Strabo and Herodotus, who lived about 450 BC. He was a Greek historian. The truth of its existence was debated by historians until recently. I want you to look at the scale and the size of these beings, okay? And so, we've just assumed all these beings were made because they had big egos. But it's quite possible that there actually were beings that large and that our ancestors were inscribing these beings in stone and in gigantic statues. In 2000, there was a French archaeologist who discovered it in this lost city while investigating unusual magnetic activity in the Nile. Magnetic activity would be the kind of thing we would discover in the Bermuda Triangle, right? In other words, they had some kind of devices that were creating magnetic anomalies. So he basically found this under about 20 to 23 feet of water. And people have looked for it for several hundred years. It was like it was frozen in time. So, of course, all these incredible things are being pulled out of the Mediterranean now, and they're being taken to the British Museum and the Cairo Museum and the Louvre and so forth. So this was part of Alexandria that was lost for more than 1,600 years. This includes Cleopatra's palace as well as the Temple of Isis that was discovered in the archaeological waters of, and these are some of the incredible artifacts. Aren't these just absolutely beautiful? So, of course, as you can imagine, all these museums are incredibly happy. And we're gonna see this lion with his foot on the ball motif. This goes back to ancient Atlantis. We find it in India, in the lost city of Dwarka. We find it in the Bahamas, and we find it here off the coast of the Mediterranean. And there are significance to this that have to do with hermetics. The lion was always a symbol of the Christ, basically. And long before Jesus came into the world, the concept of the Christ existed. It was embodied in Osiris. It was embodied as the phoenix bird, as the Bennu bird. This idea of the being that comes down to earth and basically loves humanity enough to sacrifice his or her life for humanity and to bring enlightenment to humankind even at great personal risk was always embodied by the lion. This is why Jesus was called the great lion of God. We see the same symbolism, the lion and the lamb in the house of Judah, the house of David, the lions, the great lion. So it all has to do with these great solar lords. These are figurines that they're finding from Cleopatra's palace. This reminds me of those figurines over in China that they've discovered with I think it's the Han Dynasty. So just incredible stuff. So legend holds that the Cleopatra and Mark Antony committed suicide to avoid capture by the Romans, who in turn destroyed and dispersed their belongings. That sounds like a Roman story to me. More than 140 artifacts have been excavated so far, and excavation work continues to this day in the submerged royal quarters. So again, look at the incredible scale, just absolutely mind-blowing scale. You can just see this little human guy. Okay, now most of you have heard of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, haven't you? If you haven't, this is a really important find because even mainstream archaeologists who don't ever want to admit anything beyond 10,000, you remember the story of Egypt is really like we swung out of the jungles, we were primitive people, and then poof, Egyptian and Sumerian civilization, just came up, like just add water, metallurgy, okay, really, sacred geometry, temples, writing, mathematics, things that only a sophisticated culture would have. It makes no sense. And they just don't really want us to even ask those questions. But with the work of some of my colleagues like Robert Bouval and Graham Hancock, this timeline, Robert Scooch, who's a geologist who's discovered the erosion patterns on the Sphinx, basically go back at least 10,000 years to the time of the Great Flood, which was really about 12,000 years ago. So, and that's really when Atlantis went down and a lot of these places got lost, and the water level rose 400 feet in a period of about 1 month all over the planet. And so there was a lot of land masses that were submerged. So Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, even conservative estimates say is at least 10,000 years old, and they don't know what to make of it. So they found absolutely no tools, no carving tools, no settlement close by, nothing that would, who made it? And where did they go? And how did they make it? They don't know. Now, some believe it's at least 14,000 years old, and it was completely covered up. And what's interesting is they've excavated 3 circles now, but they believe there are about 50 different circles underneath the ground, all of these. So for what purposes did they make it? And so this is not being ignored by traditional archaeologists. So, their version is we were all Neolithic hunter-gatherers around 12,000 years ago. You can go to all these museums. I go to museums all over the world, and they have us sitting around, like cavemen trying to get the fire going. That's their version of where we were at this time. So this doesn't really make sense. You can see that they did concentric circles, and concentric circles becomes a theme. Usually there's 3 circles, and you'll see this in Atlantis. The Atlantis had the 3 circles with the water, the land, the water, the land, and then the central temple in the middle. And this all relates to the idea of the Trinity, and it's not the Trinity we learned, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. I don't know why anybody has not asked where the mother is. My goodness, really. It's a father, a mother, and a child. We can see it in all biology. This is not rocket science, boys and girls. Most of us have forgotten that the Holy Ghost is really the Holy Spirit, which is the feminine face of God. We forgot that it is the Shekinah, the sine wave, that is the breath of God that moves everything through all of the cosmos. So, the Trinity was well known. If you look at the atom, what have you got? The proton, the neutron, and the electron. It's the same kind of thing. The left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, and the awakening of the third eye, which leads to enlightenment. It's always about the middle path. You look at the tree of life, the left-hand path, and we're not talking about evil. The right-hand path, we're not talking about evil. We're talking about the masculine and the feminine that when brought into unity creates enlightenment. This is what Jesus taught. When you make the 2 eyes into one, you make the inner into the outer into the inner, the male into the female, and the female into the male, then you shall see the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about a spiritual technology of awakening both parts of ourselves, to awaken the third eye, to have access to who you truly are in your divine nature, to have access into the inner realms, to be able to soul travel, to be able to connect with your higher self, to connect with your spirit guides, to be able to interact at the higher regions with these great spiritual teachers and masters that only want us to awaken. So this mysterious temple consists of 3 huge stone circles. It was deliberately buried for unknown reasons in the past, and now they believe there may be as many as 50 other circles buried under the soil inside the temple. And this is, of course, our interpretation. We don't really know. Is an underground doorway thought to represent a portal to the other world, symbolically. How can you create 19-foot-tall, perfectly sculpted columns, 12,000 years old, and not find any evidence of tools used to accomplish this? The truth is, we have no idea. So currently, measurements place this oldest stratum at the Göbekli Tepe around 9600 BC. That's 11,600 years ago, which some say that's when the flood happened. This means that even at conservative estimates, this site is at least 7,000 years older than the current version of the Egyptian pyramids and 6,500 years older than Stonehenge. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? It gives you some perspective. So in other words, Göbekli Tepe was built in a period of history where mainstream scholars believed that people were not developed to the point that they could have achieved these intricate projects. Researchers have no explanation for how a highly advanced culture could have even existed at this time. After 13 years of digging, archaeologists have failed to recover a single stone cutting tool. No one's been able to understand how ancient mankind, which was believed to be incapable of such feats, erected some of the greatest stone works on this planet. But what most bothers mainstream scholars is the fact that so far they've failed to unearth a single stone cutting tool from the ruins of Göbekli Tepe. So it's still being excavated today, and hopefully it won't be covered up if they actually find cool stuff. Now, most of you probably don't know about Dwarka. Dwarka is a city off the west coast of India, and it went down at least 12,000 years ago. It was said to be at least 21,000 years old, and it was the city of Lord Rama from the Ramayana. I don't know if you guys know the Ramayana, but it's good to know these things because I think just like the Old Testament has a lot of history in it, if you can weed out what's propaganda from what actually was literal fact, and you probably got a lot of good facts in there, the same kind of thing with the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are two great books. Now, this city, Dwarka, was built on the coast like this, and it was said to be very beautiful, but it was taken down by this gigantic, the Great Flood. It was one of the ones that went under the water. And so they've started excavating, and they've been finding, evidence for some of its ruins. So that means that there was an advanced civilization up on the planet 12,000 years ago that had been up for probably 21,000, years, and then it was taken down 12,000 years ago. This was the city, actually, of Rama and Sita, which in their day were said to be incarnations of the divine father and mother, or daughter and son, much as we could say Jesus and Mary Magdalene were, or St. Francis and Clare were. Over and over again, they come as partners. So the story of the Ramayana is a very interesting one. Basically, it was said that the divine, God, the male, periodically comes to Earth, and he comes with his male and female incarnations. He was a very highly conscious prince, and he was an incarnation. He contained, all the universe within himself. And we could say all of us contain the universe within himself, except he knowingly embodied that kind of purity in himself. And what happened was that he was a noble king. He was the eldest son of this king, and the king had two wives. So the oldest wife, this was her son, and then the younger wife wanted her kid to be the king. Okay, typical. And so at one point, and they basically ruled this very beautiful city. And at one point, the king got sick, and the younger wife cured him. But he said, I'm so grateful, I'll give you anything you want. And so what she wanted was for her son to take the throne. But she got his promise first, and because he gave that promise, he did not go back on it, but he never spoke to that wife again, because everybody knew that basically this kind of Christed being is the one that should become the king. And so he was married to Sita, and she was the female incarnation of that Christ. And so it was a much earlier age of man where there were mer people on the planet, and there's some evidence that there may still be some mer people on the planet. That's a whole other conversation. There were also these beings that were like monkey guys, okay? They could talk and communicate. Now, maybe everyone was telepathic back then, okay? Maybe they were only talking telepathically. But what happened was that basically Rama said, okay, no problem, I'll go into exile until that wife basically dies. And so his brother was like, I don't want to sit on your throne. You need to sit on the throne. I'm going to put your shoes on the throne, and I will never sit on the throne until you come back. So he had a good brother. That was good. So Sita said, well, I'm going with you. If you're going to the jungle or the forest, I'm going. And his best friend said, I'm going too. I've got to protect you. So they all left the city, and all the people, of course, were very, very sad. And they lived in the forest for quite some time. And eventually, there was this demonic, dark being. It was called a Rishasha. And he decided he was going to basically abduct Sita. And that's exactly what he did. And there was an eagle that came and attacked Ravana to try to stop him, and he cut off the eagle's wings. And there's even pictures of Rama putting the eagle's wing back on and healing the eagle. But of course, Rama then had to figure out how to go after Sita. And so the problem was that he had to go all the way down here and then cross this water to Ceylon. This is Ceylon. And there was no bridge or anything like that. So what could he possibly do? So Hanuman and his monkey guy friends basically said, we'll help you. And they built this road. It's called Adam's Bridge, all the way to Ceylon, that allowed him to go and fight to get Sita back. And this is now a picture. We have now discovered that this land bridge actually exists. This is a NASA photograph showing from the air the land bridge of Adam's Bridge. And of course, you know, the Western world has all been saying to the Eastern world for years, these are myths and stories and they're not real. But here is evidence that this bridge actually does exist, and that this was, you know, all occurred in a much earlier age of mankind. And of course, this is actually a map from of the ancient world from National Geographic, kind of showing some of the land that has gone underwater. And so Dwarka would have been right here. This is the west coast of India. And you can see coming down to Australia and New Zealand, there was lots of land masses that are now kind of under the water, even the tip of Africa and so forth. So when this great flood happened, it affected not only the Atlantic, but all the water around the globe. Eventually, of course, Rama did confront Ravana, and he defeated him, and he got Sita back. And it's actually a very powerful tale if you ever really read it, because Rama says to him, why did you do this? And Ravana said, oh, great king, do you not know who you are? You are the divine incarnate. I could never get close to you in heaven. You would never have noticed me. So I came into the world as your mortal enemy, so at least you would notice me and come and kill me and do battle with me. And that is the real reason that I have done these things. So it's really, if you ever read that story, it's a really beautiful, beautiful story. So Dwarka's destruction took place at the same time as the Great Flood, and we see remnants of it here. So England, now most of us think we know, Stonehenge is very, very old. It was believed to be built between 3100 and 2200 BC, but who built it? Well, Stonehenge is not the only henge that they found. Stonehenge, like all the other henges, are actually aligned with the equinoxes and the solstices. The equinoxes happen at the equal points of the year, in the spring, March 23rd, and in the fall, right? September 23rd, where Libra comes in. That's when the day and night are equal, and the solstices are June 21st and December 21st. You guys know this, right? Those are the longest and shortest days of the year. Those are the 4 high holy days, and there are 8 of them. The others are 6 weeks in between. And these are times when the veils between the worlds are very thin, where you can actually access the higher worlds more easily. But there's a lot of other things this is aligned with. It's aligned with the lunar cycles, the 18-year sorrow cycles. It's aligned with the precession of the equinox and so forth. So that tells us they had advanced astronomical knowledge. Now, this is actually an earlier version of Stonehenge. It's been found recently in Scotland in the Orkney Islands, okay? And this is, they think, even older than Stonehenge. And this is found near Stonehenge. This is called Woodhenge. And they've discovered at least 3 or 4 of these hinges. And in order to do triangulation with the stars, you have to have 3 points on the earth. Any of you have ever, if you remember your geometry in 8th or 9th grade, you have to have 3 points in order to be able to triangulate a moving object like a planet in the sky. So these stone circles were all used to calculate the movement of the seasons and the stars. Here's Bluehenge. And look at this. Here's Woodhenge. Here's Bluehenge. Here's Stonehenge, okay? And they've just discovered a 4th one, I think, up this area. And so they're talking about how they used them and what they were used. This is a computer simulation of Bluehenge. But these stones were brought from 200 miles away. We still don't know today how they did it, because we, just like those Morai stones in Easter Island, we can't move those stones. They're too heavy for us with all of our equipment. And this is another hinge that's just been discovered. They haven't even named this one. So that's wood hinge, blue hinge, stone hinge is probably right up here, and then this is the new hinge. So Sea Hinge was built around 2100 BC, discovered in 1998, and again, they've recreated it but it was originally, of course, much larger than that. It was found in Norfolk. Now we're going to start to get into just a teeny. I'm going to give you a glimpse into some of the ruins that are rising that are ancient Atlantis, and I have about 10 of these sites, but I'm going to show you just a little bit of some of them. This is off the coast of Cadiz, Spain. They've turned it into a national park. It's called the Donna Ana National Park, and it was found in 2011. And this guy is convinced he's found the city of Atlantis, but he hasn't, because it's inside the Straits of Gibraltar, not outside the Straits. But it's still very interesting, and I'm sure it was created by people that were the remnants of the Atlanteans who came inland. And so basically, like Plato describes with the three rings of Atlantis, this is the Straits of Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules. It's the same thing. They found some of these ruins. You can start to see the temples underwater. These are fish swimming by. It looks almost Mayan, doesn't it? Look at this one. This is a real octopus swimming by these temples. Look at this. Incredible, these gates. And here we have the winged stone lion with the ball that we saw in Heracleon. Okay. This is actually a statue of Athena. Real statue. This is not an illustration. This is a photograph. And here fish and sharks swimming by. Okay, and in support of the series, let me just say this is not Atlantis, but I think that these are remnants of Atlantis. Now, many of you may know about Japan. How many of you know about what's been found off the coast of Okinawa, Japan, and Yogaguni? This is very interesting. They're huge sunken cities that have been found. And the size of these plazas and pyramids and cities, you basically would have to be a giant to walk up them. This is a longer conversation, but these divers found 8 separate locations in March of 1995. Look at this is a diver. Look at the size of him next to these stone platforms. Nature does not make square-cut 90-degree angles. Nature is all about round shapes. So these are not natural. And again, look at the size of the steps going up. So this is part of ancient Lemuria when there really were giants, giant steps for giant people. Again, this gives you some scale, and Frank Joseph is basically just talking about the fact that this, basically never came out in the news here. Japan reported it, and that amateurs and professionals have been working together, but basically it wasn't in any of the archaeology publications. And so he says, well, one would imagine such a mind-boggling find would be the most exciting piece of news an archaeologist could hope to learn. How can this appalling neglect persist in the face of a discovery of such unparalleled magnitude? One might conclude that there is a real conspiracy of managed information that dominates America's wellspring of public knowledge. And I would second that, okay? Now, this was part of Lemuria, and Lemuria was in the Pacific Ocean. You can see Australia. In fact, Lemuria was quite large, and it was said to be actually 3 islands at one point, Australia being one of them, another one kind of being in here, and it all kind of went down. But you can see this kind of goes over near Japan. That's Japan right up there. Okay, so what we have, this is the Pacific Plate. It shows you where Lemuria, when it was quite large, would have actually been. And you can see that we've got, the Hawaiian Islands, Samoa, the Pitcairn Islands, the Cook Islands. These are the remnants of what's left. This would have been Easter Island. And here we have California. And this is, of course, where the Ring of Fire is. And as you guys may know, this is a very unstable region. For example, we've had earthquakes all along this area. And there's like a Bermuda Triangle in this area. It's called the Devil's Triangle that has a very similar effect to our Bermuda Triangle down in the Caribbean. And so obviously there's some kind of pyramid that's active in that area, creating a magnetic anomaly. But we had, the collapse, if you remember, I think in New Zealand or Australia. I can't remember, of the Christchurch. Do you guys remember that with that big earthquake? And then we had Alaska. We've had big earthquakes. And down in Chile, we've had big earthquakes. And, of course, we've had little ones on the West Coast. But I truly believe all those light workers on the West Coast have been keeping California, safe. Now, this is what Atlantis actually really looked like. Okay, this is the Azores. And I have a whole incredible presentation. It's one of those 3 presentations. Julia and I were trying to figure out which ones to show you because it's mind-blowing. I don't have that where, I do have some of this on DVD that you can, there are a few of these downstairs. The Azores Pyramid, this is off the coast of Portugal. So let's give you a map for this. Here's France, here's Portugal, little Portugal, and here's Cadiz, Spain down here, and this is the Donna Ana Park that we just looked at down here, inside the Straits of Gibraltar. But Plato tells us very clearly it was outside the Straits of Gibraltar in the Atlantic, and that it was the size, Atlantis was the size of northern Africa and Asia Minor put together. Okay, that's large, that's a continent, all right? So this is where this has been discovered. This is the Azores, and I tell you, after I did research on the Azores, I was like, let's all move. It's so unbelievably beautiful. This is the Azores. And it truly looks like how Atlantis looked. And there are these huge calderas that, of course, were originally volcanoes at one point. The waterfalls, just absolutely incredible. And here, and of course, he talks about how there was black and yellow and white rock. So we have all of this in the Azores. This is what they found in the waters of the Azores. Giant pyramids, okay, and you can see another one here, okay. It was a fisherman that found it. So you can see from the sonar photograph, it's between these 2 islands. And this isn't the only one. You can sort of see the height is quite large. Using current GPS digital technology, it's estimated the pyramid is about 60 meters high or 170 feet. Its base is nearly 8,000 square meters, so that is pretty darn big. And this is coming down and looking at the detail. You can see this is this probably went down 22,000 years ago. 22,000 years ago. So this is quite amazing. So this is the pyramid, but look at these other pyramids. You can see smaller ones here, and it looks like there was kind of a walled enclosure here. And then it almost looks like another pyramid going on over here. So this, of course, was part of the shape when Atlantis was at its very, very, very smallest, okay? And you can sort of, again, see the Straits of Gibraltar here and kind of the Azores are in this area, and Atlantis would have been much bigger. When we come over here to South America, we're going to take a look at a little bit of what's going on over here. Now, this is off the coast of Africa where you've got Morocco. Here's Portugal and Spain. There's Cadiz again. So here's the Azores. Here's the Canary Islands, where again there have been some pyramids found that we had no idea what they're about. Thor Heyerdahl found these, I think, in the 1950s. And this is, of course, the actual real shape of Atlantis in its last incarnation. There was the Mid-Atlantic Ridge was here, and there were 10 different provinces. And there's a lot to say about Atlantis, but we're not going to deal with all of it in this presentation, but this is actually a GPS of what is underneath the Atlantic Ocean, and it's the same shape, and there appear to be these circular anomalies here where probably that circular city was. So, these pyramids, some of them are still very active, like the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle is, they actually have taken photographs, and when it's activated, it basically sucks things down or opens up a dimensional portal, and these ships and airplanes go through and disappear. Now, off the coast of Cuba, incredible things are happening. These are actually photographs of pyramid and temple buildings that went down, I'm sure, thousands of years ago off the coast of Havana. And you notice we've been opening up relationships with Havana because we're interested in all this stuff. So there are pyramids found all over the world. And in fact, I don't think that I have shown you any more of this, but in my Atlantis presentation, I literally have what looks like New York City under the water. I mean, crosshatch streets. It's unbelievable, the stuff that's happening there. So it appears that there is a pyramid culture all over the world. And these are some of the kinds of pyramids. So the question is, who built them? And why was there this culture? We know that there are now 752,252 pyramids that we have found so far. That is a lot of pyramids. And for what reason? Just to go worship in them? No. They are energy amplifiers, and they were part of a grid system that was used all over the world in an earlier incarnation by an advanced civilization. We barely know what to do with them. We all think, Egypt's the one, and of course Egypt's pretty awesome, but this is just the ones that are visible. They have now found, with sonar, they have found hundreds of pyramids up and down the Nile that are completely covered with silt. There's an archaeologist, a female archaeologist from Alabama, that is spearheading this work. It's really amazing work. So, of course, we all know about the ones at Giza, but there are 17 lost pyramids that are believed to have been found in Egypt by a team of space archaeologists from Alabama, and they think that there are a whole lot more than 17, but these they can definitely identify. Dr. Sarah Parkat and her team at a NASA-sponsored laboratory at the University of Alabama in Birmingham made the discoveries using a satellite survey and found more than 1,000 tombs and 3,000 ancient settlements and infrared images that show up with buildings underground. So all up and down the Nile, the BBC reported that 2 of the suspected pyramids had been confirmed by initial excavations, and she says, we're very interested in doing this research, or very intensely doing this research for over a year. I could see the data as it was emerging, but for me, the aha moment was when I could step back and look at everything we'd found. I couldn't believe we could locate so many sites all over Egypt. And so this is extremely exciting. In other words, these pyramids have been covered up since the time of the Great Flood, 12,000 years ago. There was a huge advanced civilization. If you ever look at the gods list, Ptah, who was really Inky, ruled for 9,000 years. Ra ruled for 1,000 years. And then you start with Geb and Shu and those guys that ruled for about 750 or 450 years, until eventually you come down to Osiris, who was really wonderful. We loved him. But then he was murdered by his evil half-brother Set, who was really jealous of him. And then Set threw Egypt into chaos for 350 years, and then Horus took over. And that's why Isis and Horus were so important, because they found a way to take Egypt back from the dark into the light. And that was the last of the gods that ruled Egypt. After that, it became the demigods, which were half human and half ET. And that went on for about, I can't remember, 12, 14,000 years. And then we finally get to the first human kings around 3100 BC, Menes. Okay, and that's when we start counting archaeology and Egyptian history. But, they've just completely dismissed all that other stuff because they really don't want to even admit that gods existed, which is kind of a sad thing. It's all been hidden from us. Dr. Sarah Parquet said it was likely that more buildings would be found. These are just the sites that are close to the surface. There are many thousands of additional sites that the Nile is covered up with silt. This is just the beginning of this kind of work. It just shows how easy it is to underestimate both the size and scale of past human settlements. So these are pyramids that most of us don't know very much about. I think this is more in the Sudan area, which is really pretty deserty, but it wasn't desert before the flood. All this was a green delta Nile, but when you put, salt water, ocean water all over the land, it kills everything, and so this has been desert ever since. So this worldwide grid really was all around the planet, and you can see these are some you might not know about. This is Germany. This is Sardinia. This is Russia. This is Macedonia. That's where Alexander the Great came from, his father Philip of Macedonia. This is Bosnia. This is Serbia. This is Slovenia. This is Turkey. Okay, this is the Canary Islands. So here in Italy, very interesting. A lot of these things now are covered up. But look, you can see from the air, even though it looks like just kind of like a big old hill here, here we see very clearly it's a pyramid. This is Egypt and Mesoamerica. These are the Mesoamerican ones. These are the Egyptian ones. And of course, they made them flat at the top so the UFOs could land on the top. So here we are in Mexico. Here we are in Rome. Yep, Rome. Rome knows all about it. They've been hiding it for 2,000 years. China is incredible. China, now we're finally getting some access to China. Look at all the pyramids here, and they're just covered over. People plant stuff on them because what are they supposed to do, you know? This is more in China. This is from the Zhejiang province. Again, you can see very clearly from above. And I want you to see, these are the three in Giza. These are the three in the Shanghai province in China. Repeating, even the little guys. Look at the little guys on the side, the little guys on the side. Okay, the little guys on the side. Clearly, they were made by the same beings. Here's a pyramid in a lake in China. This is not a natural mountain. You can see the edge right here, right here, right here. So these are some of the many, many places. Here's in the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Australia, Singapore, all over the world. Here's Bosnia. Have you guys heard about Bosnia? Bosnia is very interesting. And of course, you know, you can kind of see it's looking like a pyramid overgrown. And we can see the dimensions here. And if it was uncovered, this is kind of what we expect it would look like. So there are pyramids found all through Europe and the Americas. And you can sort of see the comparison to the Pyramid of the Sun. This is Bosnia. Look at the size of this, 722 feet. This is Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico, 210 feet. This is the Great Pyramid in Egypt, 450 feet. So this one in Bosnia is nearly twice the size. It's just incredible. El Castillo in Chichen Itza, I've been down there many times. I got to actually speak at that December 21st, 2012 thing. That was quite an amazing experience. And this is Chichen Itza, and again, we're looking at the Temple of the Jaguars and the High Priest and all of this stuff. And El Castillo is in the middle. These are pyramids found all throughout the Yucatan, and there are many. I've been to many of these sites in person. They're really amazing. Here's some more of them. Pyramids in America. The mound builders, you know. In Ohio, we have, and then Missouri, I think it is, we have the Cahokia mounds, the Indian mounds there that are just really quite beautiful. And you can sort of see what the temple complex looks like from above. This one's in Ohio. This is part of the serpent mounds. You guys know, anybody here from Ohio? Yes, amazing, beautiful state. I love that state. These are all aligned with the planets, the equinoxes, the solstices, so forth. That means that the people who made these had the astronomical knowledge to know what they were doing and to plan it out before they ever built it and to figure it out mathematically. Now, when settlers first came to America, we didn't know what the heck these things were, you know. It's like we either just ignored them, we covered them up, we built towns around them, we leveled them if we could. But what's happened is once we started excavating, we found giant bones in many, many, many of these sites. And these giants have been, you know, large, 12 foot, 15 foot, and so forth. This is in Georgia. You know, north of Atlanta, there are some really sacred burial mounds up there that are giant bones. And you can see, see these little glyphs? These are all sites of these temple mounds all throughout the southeast in this area. Because, let's see, here's Georgia. That's going to be Alabama. That's going to be Mississippi. This is Louisiana. So aren't you guys here in this Arkansas? Mm-hmm. And is that Missouri? Missouri's one up. Okay, and is that Tennessee? So you can sort of see how this mound culture was so strong, and they were burial tombs for a lot of these giants. Now, the Ohio Serpent Mound, many people don't know what it means. How many of you have actually seen this? I thought it would be super, super, super gigantic. And it wasn't super gigantic, but it was still very impressive. And what does it mean? Most people don't know. The serpent was always, and I'm going to talk about this tomorrow night, the serpent has always been a symbol of the cycles of time. It's a Hermetic symbol. And I'm always going to teach you guys Hermetics because it'll give you the keys to unlocking a lot of these mysteries. So what is this little friendly serpent doing? He seems to have a little egg in his mouth, doesn't he? What the heck could that be about? This is indicating an incredibly significant point that happens every 12,000 to 13,000 years when we cross the galactic equator. And I'm just going to give you a little peek, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow. But we go around the center of the galaxy not just like a flat record player. We go up and down like a sine wave. Everything moves like this. Breath, wind, water, tides, everything moves. It moves in a spiral, and it moves in a yin-yang fashion. And so when Atlantis fell, we dropped below the galactic equator, and we came down, and we tried to preserve our knowledge and put it back together, but then we eventually hit the trash can of unconsciousness as a human race, and we've begun to climb back up. We are now at this point. It takes 1,000 years to move through the galactic center. Okay, so we started moving into it about the time of the Renaissance, thank God, after 1,000 years of the Dark Ages. And so this began about 450 years ago, but we're still in it. We've got another probably 500, 600 years to go. When this happens, the male Christ comes in and is more dominant because this is the patriarchal age, and there are subcycles within these cycles. When this happens, we move into a golden age of higher consciousness, and the divine feminine arises. And of course, the masculine and the feminine, they come together. So it's not like she comes and where's he? They are, salt and pepper. They're a match set. So, but the divine feminine rises to help. So here we are with the galactic center, and they looked at this like a gigantic snake. And this is the dark rift at the center. And so this is the snake, and this is the mouth of the snake, and we are the egg. We are in the snake's mouth. So this tells us that the people that built this mound had been around for at least 12,000, if not 26,000 years, and they knew all about this cycle that most of us know nothing about with all of our scientific knowledge and technology. And so all of these sites are actually very sophisticated star maps that are connected to particular places, particularly the Pleiades, the Orion system, the Draco system, the Aldebaran system. Here's Draco. We see this Lyra, and I'm going to explain why all this is so important tomorrow night when we talk about that. But you can see some of these alignments. Here's Stonehenge, and here is this configuration that completely lays out Stonehenge at Winter Burr Barrows. Okay, here we have the Kukulkan Khan pyramid, same kind of thing. These stars are aligned with Orion, as we know from the work of Robert Bauval, Orion's belt. So Orion, Giza, Teotihuacan, all of these, you can see, are laid out in a very, very, very similar fashion. And they all connect with star maps because of our star ancestors, the beings who came down here. This is where Orion's belt was 160,000 years ago when this was built. Today, Orion's belt is at a great angle. Okay? So this is another temple. This is Borobudur in Indonesia, and it depicts actually a map of the universe. This is the pyramidal plan. We see the Trinity, just like we saw in the three rings of Atlantis, here at the center of it. And then if you study these, there are 7 of them, the 7-dimensional planes, and all of this is encoded knowledge if you know how to read it. And again, you can see the Pleiades right off to the side, the same configuration, telling us about links with our ancient ancestors. Russia, a very similar one, a golden pyramid near Moscow. Now, I'm not going to show you much on Alaska, but they have started finding Alaskan pyramids now that the snow is melting, and it's in this area. It's called the Alaskan Bermuda Triangle between Anchorage and Juneau and Barrow. This is kind of where they're finding them. So who the heck built them? Clearly, they were built before all that ice and snow came down in an earlier age when the poles were melted or the poles lay someplace else in another location. So this is an underground pyramid 50 miles west of Mount McKinley. Found in this is Mount McKinley right here where that red spot is. So a pyramid was found, an underground pyramid was found there. This is a very interesting one in the Grand Canyon. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? It's magnificent, isn't it? How many of you went to the South Rim? If you go to the South Rim and you look at the picture, in that control tower, it's glass and stuff. If you look on that map, they have all sorts of strange names like the Vishnu Temple, the Isis Temple. Have you ever wondered why the heck they're called those things? Well, because in 1909 they discovered this guy that was working for the Smithsonian was tooling down. He was taking a vacation. He was tooling down the Colorado River, and he found an opening. And he pulled his raft over, and he went in it. And he found basically a city that went down a mile underground, okay? And I'm going to show you some pictures from it. This is, this is the news article from it. Explorations in the Grand Canyon. This is in the Phoenix. The mysteries of immense rich cavern being brought to light. Jordan is enthused. Remarkable finds indicate ancient people migrated from the Orient. The latest news in the progress of the exploration of whatever it is. But anyway, what this guy did was he went in there and he wound up, Kincaid was his name, he wound up finding amazing things, and he sent samples to the Smithsonian. Well, within 2 weeks, there was a team of 30 or 40 excavators out there with big lights, and they barred the whole region. You can't go in there. After that, they passed the Cave Management Act that said that you could get a year in jail for going into a cave that they didn't want you to go into. And I know, sounds fishy, doesn't it? So I finally have some pictures. This was the entrance that he went into, the Kincaid Cave. And there were kind of some bushes in front of it. And this gives you an idea. This is the south rim. So if you were standing on the south rim looking this way into the Grand Canyon, the north rim would be over here. The Osiris Temple would have been to your far left. If you were in the north rim, I'm not sure you could have seen it too well. I've been on both rims. How many of you have been to the north rim? That's pretty. That's where that kind of clubhouse is, or whatever it is. I don't know what they call it, but where the ranger station is, and there's a nice hotel there that's all rustic and so forth. So this is what they found. Statues of Anubis. This is called the Tower of Ra. A whole series of cave entrances. A gigantic Buddhic statue. Look, this is a person. Look how gigantic this is. Okay, they found mummies. They found giant mummies. They found gold tablets. They found these niches where these bodies were interred as mummies. This is actually a photograph of the place. This is incredible. This is actually a photograph. There was like meditating Buddha. This is the rock walls. They found this huge cavern. They found a granary. It was a design like a Tibetan granary silo. So, there's a lot to say about what all this is about. You can see these mysteries, but why pyramids? So we have to ask that question. Who can tell me what pyramids do? Anybody? You guys are pretty smart. You remember. They sharpen razor blades, right? Remember that? They make apples and food that you put under them taste better and preserve them longer, right? Remember that? So I've got you a little list here. So I guess I'll read it. Sharpen razor blades, keep food fresh longer, preserve flowers, preserve dead bodies, keep a constant temperature of about 73 degrees, rejuvenate the body, decrease aging, accelerate cell regeneration, amplify the Earth's natural energy field, and create torsion fields. They create a spiral torsion field, and that is the template of creation. Flowers unfurl like this. The hair on the top of your head unfurls like this. When you flush the toilet, it goes down in a spiral, doesn't it? Everything moves in a spiral. Galaxies move in a spiral. Atoms move in a spiral. Everything's in a spiral. That's the great eagle's wings, the Divine Father's energy that spins it all. And the Shekinah, that's the daughter's energy. That's the sine wave. These are really the beings that are my teachers, and that's why I do the work that I do. You can see here the torsion field coming off, just like a DNA strand, off the top of a pyramid. You can see it here. And, so these are amplifiers of the Earth's natural geomagnetic energy. Here is a board, and here are the torsion fields coming off the top. So it creates a self-sustaining amplification field. This is a Carillion photograph of a pyramid in action. Pyramids are thus a natural source of energy that amplifies the electromagnetic fields of all living things, including the Earth, the largest source of electromagnetic energy available to us. So that's why they strengthen our bodies. The majority of the pyramids we have seem to be located at the center of the communities, much like modern downtown. And by the way, down in the vendor room, there are some awesome pyramids. I don't know if you guys have seen them, but there are these ones that are in color with gems that are beautiful, and then there are these beautiful glass ones that this guy down there has with the, I mean, you guys have to go down to the vendors, not just to see me, but there are wonderful things down there. And I sat under one of the pyramids today. You know, I've been sick. I've been in the bed for about a week, really super sick on antibiotics with this bug I had picked up and had about 9 days when I was out in LA. And so this is only my third or fourth day on my feet. And so I sat underneath it, and I could feel it readjusting my field and strengthening my field. So there's really some power in those. If you get a chance to go down tomorrow, please do. There's a woman all swathed in purple down there called Sister that's got some really cool ones. And you can sit under her vortex. So pyramids have also been reported to be teleportation devices or Stargate devices, and they're great for astral projection or soul travel. This is why initiations were often held in them, the Great Pyramid of Giza, because you could leave your body more easily. You could travel out on the Taurus field. So what kind of civilization would be interested in building so many pyramid structures around the world, and for what reason? Well, this brings us to obviously a conversation of Atlantis and Lemuria, earlier ages, which tomorrow we're going to really be talking about in depth. And I'm going to explain to you a lot about the cycles of time. And tomorrow will probably be 4 to even maybe 6:30, but, we get to eat about, 7 or whatever. So, I don't care. You don't have to really dress up if you don't want to. But the Antarctica is what we're going to talk about now. So how many of you guys know anything about Antarctica and what's being found down there? Oh, good. Some hands in the back. Great. If you don't know this is amazing. And I have got to tell you that I had my computer cleaned in January, had no viruses. It was just wonderful. In doing the research for this presentation, I got over 500 viruses. My computer almost completely crashed. Okay, I just got my computer clean because by going and trying to find these images, it would throw up like basically this website is contaminated, and I'm sure this is how the government is trying to persuade people not to do this research. And I would click block, but nonetheless, I got cooties. So I had 500 cooties. I just had to pay a fortune to get my computer back before I came here. So I'm going to show you the results of my cootie research. Okay. So you guys don't have to crash your computers doing this research for yourself, but be very careful if you do. So for many millennia, the Antarctic has remained unexplored. It comprises 500 million square miles, and 98% of it is covered in ice. And the average temperature is 49 degrees below zero, and the ice is 3 to 11 miles thick in places. That's like, holy smokes. That's even hard to wrap your head around imagining what that would be like. For centuries, it has been frozen and thus shrouded in mystery because basically, who could live down there? Pretty uninhabitable. Traditional scientists believe it's been frozen for 112 million years. That was the story we told ourselves. Now, maybe that's true. The jury's still out, but probably not. That is until recently. Now, when we first found out about Antarctica, it was around the 1500s. And we didn't even know Antarctica existed. In a way, it was a map called the Piri-Reis map. And this map basically was created, it was drawn in 1513. And it appears to show this continent without any ice on it. So how in the world could that happen unless somebody got above it? You'd have to be about 80 miles above it, plus the fact that you'd have to be able to cut through the ice in order to see what the actual outlines of the continent were. So they weren't really known until the last few decades where we have GPS, where we could actually penetrate that ice and confirm that this was accurate. So where the heck did this information come from? It was rediscovered in 1960 at the Library of Congress, someone who would have to be 80 miles above the Earth to plot these contours so accurately. So it appears to have been drawn from a time when there was no ice on this continent. So what we know in more recent times is that Hitler, who was, he may have been a deranged psychopath, but he was brilliant. He really was. And he had studied a lot of hidden knowledge. And I don't know if you guys know all this stuff, but he was interested in those Sumerian cuneiform texts. And he was part of a society called the Tula Society that was channeling. And they were channeling the ETs that come down here, true. They believed they'd come from Aldebaran, not true, although there are beings. They're tall, brown-skinned, very nice beings from Aldebaran that have a base on Ganymede, which is one of the moons of, I think, Jupiter. So, but that wasn't exactly right. That's not who the Sumerian gods were. They were from Nibiru. But he was really serious about going after ancient artifacts. So you remember the Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he was going after all those things? That was for real. He was going after these magical instruments. And I could talk about magical instruments and how they're made, and they basically are a repository of enormous amounts of energy that are stored, that if you know how to open them up and use them, you actually can use them. So he was all for this, and he mounted expeditions to Tibet and to many places. But one of the expeditions he mounted was to Antarctica, smart like a fox. So in December of 1938, Adolf Hitler sent a 33-person team to Antarctica with scientists, engineers, and members of the Thule Society looking for signs of an advanced civilization, and this was called the Schwabenland ship. Okay, they set up a base. It was called Base 211. It was an underground Nazi base, and they came back with a flying saucer that they had found down there. And they were back engineering this technology. This is a real photograph from Nazi Germany with a flying saucer. So all those tabloids we've been seeing for years, that are like, Hitler had a UFO, actually, they're right. Hitler did have a UFO, and he was back engineering the technology. And if he had managed to really implement this into other ships, we would have lost the war. And this is why we had to do the Normandy invasion in such a hurry, because the Allies figured out what he was doing, and they realized that we could actually lose this war. So what happened is we're really trying to back engineer this technology to win the war. These are actual photographs from that time. Look at these UFOs. This is in Antarctica. And this was their submarines. So they set up this colony, and they called it New Berlin. And they found, after the war, that over 100 of their top scientists had vanished. We divided the scientists. The Russians got some, and the Americans got some. But then later, when the Russians and the American scientists that used to be German got together, they're like, well, we're the smart guys. The smartest guys had all disappeared, along with about 100 submarines. And where they had gone was down to Antarctica. Now, the Allies figured out that this was what was going on, and they decided, we have got to root out, the Nazis once and for all. So they chose a man named Richard Byrd, Admiral Richard Byrd, who was highly decorated. He was a 33-degree Mason, and he had already been to the North Pole, and he had already made one trip to the South Pole. So they selected him to oversee this fleet, and he took a fleet down there, and it was quite large. In 1946, this convoy went after him. There were 4,700 men. 13 naval ships, an aircraft carrier, and several seaplanes. Its mission was to root out the German Nazis. He was highly decorated. He had received the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was a 33-degree Mason who had already flown over the North Pole, and he actually claimed that the North Pole had an opening in it to the inner Earth. And if you notice, they don't normally let us take photographs anymore or show us any images of the North Pole, because they don't really want us to know that there is an inner Earth. So what happened in this journey was he wound up discovering, accidentally, he was flying a plane, and he wound up flying into the inner Earth of the South Pole, and he wound up in this beautiful tropical area with gigantic trees, gigantic fruits, gigantic people, 14, 16 feet tall, very benevolent, very kind, and he wound up meeting this master, the spiritual master. So this was his second journey to the South Pole. This operation was called Operation High Jump, and militarily it was considered a failure because basically there were UFOs that the Nazis had gotten that came up out of the water and the bases and basically kicked their asses, so to speak. These flying saucers cut through with lasers. They cut through some of their ships, and they basically drove Admiral Byrd and his troops away. So the Nazis did have UFOs, and I'll show you a few pictures. Here's one. This was tested February 14th, 1945, and the war ended, if you remember, in 45. Wasn't it 45, 46?
No, 45,
August, right. So you see how close this was. It was really a race for the Allies to stop the advancements of this technology, which would have been terrible. Imagine if Hitler had taken over the world. So here's one of the UFOs. Here's another one over a submarine. These are 3 others over Antarctica. Here's Nazi, same thing. Admiral Byrd claimed that he passed into this frozen world into a warm world that was inside the earth. And he said that this whole area is called Agartha and that the capital is called Shambhala. He says that the diameter of the earth is 8,000 miles. The diameter of the inside of the earth is 6,400 miles in diameter. So it's quite large inside, and this is about, I think, 800 miles between the two of them, something like that, 800 to 1,200 miles. But he says that there's a sun inside the earth and that they all live in peace and that these are the remnants of the Lemurian civilizations and the Atlantean civilizations and that they're overseen by these master beings and that they have been holding this space for peace and love and harmony for us on surface dwellers to get it right. But the message that they basically gave him, he was taken to this incredible crystal city, and he was met by this ancient master, and he was basically told that they had pretty much let us alone to go through our little petty wars that we seem to be so addicted to, but at the point that we started using atomic weapons, they got concerned. So he met this master that was said to be 150,000 years old. And the master told him that there were 7 races who lived in harmony inside the earth and had been there since the time of the fall of Lemuria, which would explain why there are giants there, because there were giants at the time of Lemuria and even Atlantis. But that we had hit the atomic age and we could destroy ourselves and our planet. And that now they were getting concerned because it could affect every life form. There were apparently mastodons down there and many other animals that we think of that have gone extinct that were peacefully living there. So apparently there's water and lakes and it's quite beautiful. He said grapes were like the size of, a watermelon or cantaloupe. Everything was very large. Admiral Byrd's account of his expeditions, he came back, of course, and reported to the higher-ups who debriefed him but were not really wanting him to talk about this. So he wrote this book first, but he had a secret diary that he wrote about what had happened to him. And there is some belief that he actually was killed. Now, what's interesting is on my last trip, when I was coming back from Los Angeles, I was in the airport for a little bit of a layover, and I was trying to get something to eat, and it was one of those cafes where there were way too many people and too few seats, and so somebody gave me their table when they left, and so then there were people who came in, and so I offered a seat to this fella. This fella wound up to be the, can't remember if he was the great-grandson of Admiral Byrd, and he told me secret stuff about what they knew in the family. And he said all this is totally true and that they believe that Byrd was murdered by our government because he didn't really want to stopped talking about it. I mean, he was a military man, so he mostly obeyed, but he obviously told some people. And in the research of doing all of this, I discovered that there was a colonel that wrote a report in 2006, and that he had been stationed at Area 51 and was not allowed to come up to see daylight for 18 years, but that his job was to interface with the people inside the Earth. And he said they had an incredibly fast, like subway system that in a matter of, 20, 30 minutes took you through the Earth's crust. And that the beings were incredibly peaceful, spiritually evolved, and advanced. And that everything we want our society to be, they already were. And so that gives me hope, despite the insanity of things like the Illuminati and the Cabal and all those things that, appear certainly to exist in some way, shape, or form, that there are very advanced beings that really love us and are rooting for us. And apparently, according to this colonel, we have set up a liaison with the inner Earth. Now, of course, there might be very conscious, lovely people within the government that really want things to change, but they are under a chain of command. So the more unconscious the higher ups are, the worse in trouble we are, okay? So, and of course, military people are trained to kill and defend with violence if necessary. So they kind of come from the protective stance, and it can be the fear-based stance. And so, but I think it opens the door for something very hopeful. Something very, very hopeful that, and because of what's going on in Antarctica, some of this information may begin to come into the public knowledge. Most of us have been raised to believe that war and strife and conflict are just to be expected. Of course there's another war, of course there's another war, of course, we're programmed. I love bang bang, shoot 'em up adventure movies and, as much as anybody. I thought Independence Day was fun, but the aliens are always the enemies. It's always about training us to be in fear and to be aggressive, and it's dualistic consciousness. And so this is actually very exciting that on this planet there is non-dualistic consciousness and that we could grow into that kind of world. So we started sending expeditions back in the 60s, probably hoping the Nazis had died out, which they probably had. And once these icebergs began to melt, particularly on the west side, we began to set up bases and we began to investigate. We found amazing things. We found at least 3 pyramids, and I suspect that there's 7 down there for some very good reasons that have to do with knowledge within the great mystery schools. That's one of them. That's another one. So far, they've found 3 pyramids, 2 about 10 miles inland, and the 3rd on the coast. Some say these pyramids are 2 or 3 times the size of the one at Giza, and I'll show you a comparison here. Here we can see from Google Earth, the outlines. And here we can see the Giza pyramid, and here's this pyramid. Pretty clear it's a pyramid. This is another one from Stockholm University, 2012, showing a step pyramid-sized object. And this appears to be one of the step kind that we've seen of some description. And these are some of what we've discovered. I love this black one. I think that one's cool. Now, the USA and 7 other countries have sent expeditions there, establishing 68 international bases because everybody wants the technology. It's the race for the technology. So the U.S. has set up a base camp at a Munson Scott station, but their big station is McMurdo, and they have over 1,000 to 1,200 personnel there. This is pretty busy, you can see. It's on the eastern side of Antarctica, and it's the largest research station on the continent. They found downed UFOs in the ice and snow. Look at this one. Here's another one. Probably the Nazis couldn't drive really well in the beginning. Probably crashed a bunch of these ships before they figured out how to drive them. Here's an object, we don't know what, so Google Earth, stuck in the snow. This one is a very thin one, kind of hard to see. It kind of looks like this. See that? And like there's some, see this little beading on it? So there's some kind of, I don't know what it is. It looks like a piece of pie to me, with some beading on it or something. But it's stuck somehow in the ice or the mountainside. So probably there were some pilots that went to their deaths learning how to fly them. They've also found some kind of metallic sphere. I have no idea what this is for. None. They found a mothership. In fact, they found 3 motherships. And this is an image that was shot by Google Earth and then forced to be taken down. I've got 2 of these images. This is the other one. Why did the Google censor take it off? Well, I imagine that the government had something to say about that. So these are entrances for the UFOs to go in. They've found 2 of them. Again, Google Earth. Thank Google Earth for all this. Approximately 30 meters in height. That'd be about, almost 90 feet or something. A meter's almost 3 feet, right? So 3 times, what is this? Is that 90 feet, boys and girls? Okay. So here's one. It looks like it's covered almost by like a metallic or almost looks leather-like here, but ships can go in and out of it. You can see here. In 2001, they found a city on the east side of Lake Vostok. This is the largest lake in Antarctica, 65 by 46 miles. Underneath it was unusual magnetic activity spreading out over 50 miles. So pilots that were flying over this area were experiencing magnetic energy fluctuations. In January 2016, Linda Moulton Howe, many of you may know her. She's a colleague of mine, excellent researcher, tells us she was contacted by a retired flight engineer that was stationed at McMurdo. He was summoned for a medical emergency, and they wound up flying over this huge opening in the ice that was 200 feet in diameter, and his instruments went crazy. So this is an illustration. It's not, we're an artist, or, we're all trying to figure out what does it all look like, okay? Obviously, they're not letting us down there at this point. Scientists in the British Antarctic Survey, in collaboration with the International Institute, have managed to create a detailed map showing the mountain ranges, valleys, and plains in a never-before-seen way, revealing many more details. The map was created using a variety of different techniques, including echo sound, seismic techniques, as well as cartographic data and satellite recordings. And this is kind of a cutaway of the land under the ice sheet as we think that it exists, with mountain ranges and rivers and so forth. And they conform to that Peary-Reese map. Here we can see NASA ground-penetrating images showing pyramid-like structures, square things that look like they were cities or temples or whatever, and revealing basically traces of some kind of ancient human settlement under almost 3 kilometers of ice. There are 2 Navy SEALs that have been down into the underground city, which goes 2 miles below. The ice claims that what they saw was actually fantastic. They reported to the National Science Foundation upon their return home. So reported sources at McMurdo Station, the main American base in Antarctica, they said it showed spectacular ruins and other things that they couldn't go into, and the National Science Foundation scientists reported. We chalked it up to some kind of sub-zero induced delusion, he said, until a helicopter full of Navy SEALs landed and picked them up and took off. Now we're scratching our heads. Officials of the U.S. Naval Support Task Force at Antarctica predictably denied the story or the possession of any video shot by the missing Atlantis TV crew that had gone into Antarctica to film and suddenly vanished. Navy sources said they found the video in an abandoned supply dump 100 miles west of Vostok Station. Basically, there was a crew that went down there, a TV crew, and they've completely vanished. So were they killed or were they conscripted by the government to do a documentary about it for the government that, of course, has not been released? But obviously, this crew must have found some way to, hope someone would find their stuff, and they threw it in a trash before they got taken off. And so we really don't know if they're still alive or they're being repurposed for the military's own purpose. But this is one image from below. This pyramid is 4 times the size of Giza. It's pretty amazing. So the truth is we don't really know what it looks like, but what I have heard from my sources is that they have found huge skeletons down there. like 14, 16, 18 feet with elongated heads as well as human skeletons. It appears that it was originally built by a very positive advanced race that then was involved in trying to help seed the earth, and then they left a long time ago, and then these other extraterrestrials found the city and began to use it themselves. And whether those were the Anunnaki gods, we don't know. They believe that there were genetic, experiments being done. Now, experiments not like torturing people, but more like trying to up the DNA of the humans that were being done there. But all of this, they believe this city may go back 25 million years. Okay, that's like enormous. But the city was like flash frozen 12,000 years ago when Atlantis, there's a lot to say about Atlantis, but Atlantis was taken down through a variety of things, but the short answer is a big meteor hit it, and it fractured the mid-Atlantic ridge, and it created buckshot all through the Carolinas. We have hundreds of buckshot hits in North and South Carolina from the debris that it spread. But that's what took Atlantis down, and of course, you have a huge body going down. It's like a bathtub. The water in the bathtub is going to come splash all over, both sides, the Atlantic and the Pacific. And so the poles shifted. This is the woolly mammoths with the buttercups stuck in their mouth that we've discovered in ice. So the poles were not where they are now, but they suddenly reversed. And so this whole center was flash frozen. So it's really preserved. That's the good news. And of course, the bad news is that there was a lot of civilization that was lost. And that's a big conversation about why it was taken down that we'll talk about tomorrow, and how it connects to where we are now in the cycles of time. So obviously, there was a time when there was advanced civilization on this earth. And UFOs were coming and going. We, human beings, were having ongoing contact with ETs. And again, we can only guess about which ones they were. These are some of the elongated skulls we see from, of course, places like Egypt and so forth. So these are some of the kinds of skulls that they found down there. And we can sort of see this in the children of Akhenaten and from Amara. And so that takes us into a whole conversation about where we are today, how it corresponds to what happened 12,000 years ago, how the poles are melting now gradually. The poles have already shifted 9 degrees towards Siberia. We definitely have earth changes that are going on, climate changes that are going on. Some of it's natural and some of it is highly accelerated by the fossil fuel industry and the oil and gas and all the stuff that we've been burning. And, what goes up must come down. As Al Gore has shown, the temperatures rise the highest and then they drop the lowest. So we have a lot of times hotter summers and colder winters. So we definitely have global warming. And so tomorrow we'll be talking about these new discoveries that can revolutionize the world. We'll be talking about where we are now, how it's connected with our past, how there are star beings that are coming down here to try to change the fate of the world. And many of you are those beings. Many of you are beings that incarnated down here as a human in our great dysfunctional societies, in our great dysfunctional households, and we threw ourselves into the fire, and from heaven it looked pretty easy. In heaven it was like, sure, I'll go down and help. They need some help. We're all one, no problem. But then we got down here and we inherited these systems, and by the time we get old enough to do something about it, we're partway programmed. And then we're having to do things like get a job and pay the bills and deal with the mortgage and all those other crazy things that are part of our society. So the question becomes, how can we unite and awaken to change this flow of time so that this age ends differently? We're coming to the end of the fourth age. And so we'll be talking about all that tomorrow, and it'll probably be about 4 to 6:30. So, and you still have time, and we get to eat tomorrow night, so no worries. But If you feel like you have to dress up for tomorrow night, try to wear something a little dressy, or you'll only have about 30 minutes to run back to your room and change. I hope all of you enjoyed this. I'll be at my booth tomorrow morning, as will a lot of other people with cool pyramid power down there, and I hope you'll come and visit us. But I hope this was, interesting for you, was it? So glad.